Fans of Star Wars The Clone Wars often argue about which clone character was the best. Many think it's Captain Rex, the show's poster boy. Others would argue that it's Wolf, Fives, or perhaps a more unconventional choice. However, as the legends and enjoyers in the audience know, the best clone character is actually Alpha-17. Alpha was one of the first ARC troopers trained by Jango Fett himself. He served as a commander alongside Obi-Wan Kenobi and Anakin Skywalker early in the war, distinguishing himself in command roles in several battles. He was one of the most competent clones in the entire Grand Army, and one of the coldest too. In this video, we're taking a look at Alpha and his rather callous tactics.
Attention, Sergeant on deck!
Alpha-17 was part of the Alpha-class ARC troopers, a lineage that also included Alpha-77, better known as Captain Fordo. The Alpha class only contained 100 clones, and they were bred to be the greatest soldiers in the galaxy. Unlike most clones, they were almost exact copies of Jango Fett, but with slightly enhanced physical attributes. This meant the Alpha class ARCs were a lot darker and more solitary than their normie brethren. In fact, we reckon some of them would give Crosshair a run for his money in this regard. But they were indisputably effective. Alpha-17 was even more intense than some of his brothers. The man held nothing back, always willing to tell everyone from civilian politicians to his superior officers exactly what he thought about them. He was also quite open about his complete lack of regard for innocent lives. In his view, there was no such thing. He was even willing to murder young clones if he felt the mission demanded it. Like many other clones, he had a laser focus on completing his missions, but not necessarily out of any sense of loyalty to the Republic. Like Crosshair, Alpha fought for the Republic because it was his job, and that was all he really needed. Like most of the other Alpha class ARCs, Alpha preferred to work as a lone wolf but rarely got the opportunity to do so. Most of the time, he served as a commander, albeit in a less traditional capacity than most clone commanders. ARC troopers, in case you didn't know, weren't actually part of the GAR military hierarchy. They and the clone commandos had their own separate hierarchy under the banner of the Republic's Special Operations Brigade. Nonetheless, Alpha and many of his brothers were chosen to act as clone liaisons by Jedi generals, attaching themselves to GAR units in a command advisory role. This is important to know before considering Alpha's tactics for a few reasons. First, the scope of Alpha's command varied wildly. On some missions, he had little command authority beyond a small squad, while sometimes he acted in a leadership role for entire planetary invasion forces. Secondly, since Alpha wasn't attached to any given clone unit, he didn't bond with the men under his command, and as a result, he didn't care about them nearly as much as a clone like Rex would. On the battlefield, Alpha was capable of ruthlessness equal to some separatist commanders. His logic was simple. Most of the time, he found the most efficient path to his objective, and he took it. Sometimes, this meant sacrifices or callous maneuvers, while at other times, it ended up saving lives. He usually stood his ground against moral objections to his plan, but he was willing to hear out objections and would acquiesce if a more efficient plan came to light. A good example of this would be Alpha's first mission, the First Battle of Kamino. This battle, which took place near the start of the war, saw Tipoca City almost completely overrun, leading to the Kaminoans to dispatch the ARC troopers in a desperate effort to turn the tide. Upon being awakened from suspended animation, the troopers immediately set about doing what Jango Fett had ordered them to do in such a situation. In Alpha's case, this meant destroying all of the youngest generations of clones, those too young to be easily evacuated. Without the slightest bit of hesitancy, Alpha set out to blow his younger brothers to smithereens, responding to objections from the Jedi present with the chilling assertion, either they grow up loyal to the Republic, or they don't grow up at all. The Jedi, naturally, weren't willing to stand for this and insisted that Alpha first give them a chance to save the young clones. After consideration, Alpha agreed to do so. On the spot, he came up with a new plan. If the Jedi would cut the youngest clones off from the rest of the facility, he offered, he would abort the detonation sequence. The Jedi complied, and Alpha shut off the bombs before returning to the main fight. It's worth noting here that Alpha was technically the lowest ranking adult in the room that episode. Despite this, he not only saw fit to order his Jedi superiors around, but also got them to follow his plans. Clearly, Alpha didn't care all that much about clone lives, but his fellow clones weren't the only innocents he was willing to sacrifice either. During the Battle of Jabim, Alpha repeatedly asked General Kenobi for permission to hunt down and assassinate the remaining Jabimi political leaders, most of them civilians, believing that it would weaken the resolve of the enemy and hasten an end to the battle. Kenobi repeatedly struck the plan down, but Alpha was persistent, especially since he believed they would probably be killed before the battle's end anyway. Unlike on Kamino, Kenobi wasn't able to present a more efficient alternative to Alpha's morally dubious plan, so Alpha stood his ground. The only reason he didn't go over Kenobi's head and order the assassination mission anyway was that he respected Kenobi. Alpha was a cold mofo. He was willing to sacrifice anything to complete his objectives if he deemed it necessary. But it should be said, his tactics weren't completely heartless. He was willing to go out of the way to rescue hostages even if it complicated missions, and he never ordered his men to do anything he wasn't willing to do himself. Most of the time, in fact, he led the charge into battle, putting his own life on the line before anyone else's. On Boz Pity, for example, Alpha was severely wounded in a battle with General Grievous, leaving him unable to stand and potentially paralyzed from the waist down. Despite this, as the medics hauled him away to a transport, he insisted on getting a blaster and returning to the fight, reasoning that his arms worked just fine. He wasn't willing to let the men under his command stand alone against Grievous, at least not until he was dead. If you asked, Alpha would have told you that this was because he preferred to do jobs himself so that they got done right. But that would be only partly true. He did care for the troops under his command and was willing to sacrifice himself to win a battle just as much as any of them were. As a general rule, Alpha's strategies were brutal and often callous, but they were also undeniably effective. He subjected his enemies to relentless pressure, going right for the throat whenever he could. With that said, Alpha wasn't overly aggressive. He always kept an eye on the flanks of his armies, careful they weren't becoming overextended. Notably, this happened in the Battle of Jabim. In the earlier stages of the battle, Republic forces on Jabim won engagement after engagement for 2 weeks on end, giving the Jedi generals leading the charge hope that Jabim would fall within short order. But while the Jedi were starting to become optimistic, Alpha kept a level head and realized that Republic forces were being strung out. On his initiative, the vanguard of the Republic army was recalled to defend the command center at Shelter Base just before it came under attack. Alpha's intuition saved many lives that day. Even though the casualties at Shelter Base were staggering, they would have been far worse without his observation. Unfortunately for the Republic, Alpha was one of the casualties at Shelter Base, having been badly wounded and then captured by the Separatists. Without him, Jabim rapidly turned into a bloodbath. Alpha was absolutely a cold commander, but not beyond reason, nor to the point of overt cruelty. He never allowed himself to get so caught up in offensives that he developed tunnel vision, unlike a number of less aggressive Jedi generals. So that's our look at the tactics of Alpha-17, but what do you think? Are there other characters you'd like us to look at? Let us know your thoughts in the comments section below, and as always guys, thank you so much for watching, and I hope to see you in the next video.